What are some other vaccines that were administered that you would say is a bit of a train wreck or cause more harm than good?
Well, I have an entire chapter about the swine flu fiasco, and people may not remember that. Some of your listeners may. 1976, Gerald Ford was president. There was a case of swine flu in Fort Dix, in an army barrack, and that made everybody in the government petrified that they were going to get a repeat of the 1918 swine flu epidemic, the Spanish flu, which we certainly heard a lot about recently. And so they started to gear up for a massive vaccination inoculation program without numbers of cases spreading, believe it or not. And they spent $135 million. They picked 4 pharmaceutical companies to get the vaccines ready. Those pharmaceutical companies were in heaven. They geared up for it. They manufactured it. We're talking Merck, Pfizer, big companies. And then the government went to them and said, okay, we need the vaccines. We're going to do the inoculation. And the company said, nope, not so fast. They held the 100 million back in a public health crisis to say we want 2 things. We want our reasonable cost to be covered. There's a big difference between what I consider reasonable and what they consider reasonable. And we want to be covered for any lawsuits, for any liability at all. Government gave them both of that. Those companies walked away with tens of millions of dollars in profit. We in the United States gave out 40 million shots before we realized there was no swine flu pandemic. And what was the result? Something called Guillain-Barré, a neurological disorder that's very rare, that was a side effect of this shot that nobody had taken into account and didn't realize it was. And as those cases multiplied, the federal government ended up with 4,000 lawsuits of people whose lives have been turned upside down. So you look back just to 76, swine flu, it's a fiasco.
So is that a turning point then in 1976 when these vaccine makers pulled back the vaccines and basically had leverage on the US government who funded the research on this, right? So the US government funds it, the pharmaceutical companies make it, and then they withhold the vaccines and they say now we want total immunity if there's lawsuits. Is that a turning point for big pharma when it comes to vaccines?
So this is what's so fantastic about knowing the playbook for big pharma. So what I give you in this book is their playbook, and their playbook doesn't change because they get away with it time and again, and nobody's come in and said, by the way, we're instituting new rules to make it fair. So you would think that the public was so enraged, the government was so enraged. Jimmy Carter, who became the next president, would say, never going to happen again. I'm going to institute rules in the FDA and in HHS. You'll never be able to pull that fast one again. And guess what? Bring ourselves all the way up to 2020 and COVID-19. $8.3 billion is the first funding that comes out of the federal government that's running out to COVID. $3 billion of that is straight research money given to the drug companies like a giveaway. And what do? In the first draft of the bill for that 8.3 billion, there are 2 provisions in there, one of which would allow the government to have a real hammer to come in if the drug price on the vaccine was too high and be able to push that price down. The second one was to say, meaning the drug companies, aren't going to own the intellectual property rights to the research. We will, and we'll make it public for everyone. Both of those clauses were taken out in the final draft of the 8.3 billion. Why? Because the pharmaceutical companies know what they want to do. If they wait until the end, when the vaccine is nearly ready and the public is anxious and they've been cooped up for a long time and they've been self-isolating and everybody is ready for the vaccine to be the answer to end COVID, they are in the ultimate position of leverage, just as they were in 76 when the Ford administration said, give us the doses now. And they said, no, hold up, we've got 2 things. They got those 2 things given in rapid time. And here, if we don't keep our eye on the ball, we will get to the stage where we have a vaccine from one of these companies or a consortium of them, and they will be in the position to dictate the terms on price and on liability.